Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Bearkland. Um, my family and I are sick, and we're in home quarantine, so I'm going to do the best I can with this. My case study, I went to a Safety Harbor meeting on February 3rd, 2020 at 7 p.m. And the case that I was looking at was the first reading of a quasi-judicial hearing, the zoning designation for a recently annexed property uh, at 2450 Madrid Avenue, uh, Ordinance number 2019-25. So what this was a rezoning of a property that had recently been annexed by the city of Safety Harbor. When I started studying this case, I didn't really realize what I would be looking at here, and I quickly came to realize that in order to adequately discuss this, I would have to talk about the annexation portion of this as well. Um, my expert interview was with Mr. Brandon Henry, um, the city of Safety Harbor. He is a community planner and a GIS analyst with the city. He's been in that position for about 9 months. He's currently also a graduate student in public policy and administration at USF. Uh, this is my business card. I know it's backwards, but you get the idea. So let me give you the my issue. The issue is of when, how, and for what reasons properties can and should be legally annexed and rezoned by the City of Safety Harbor in a most efficient and cost-effective manner. Um, the history of this case uh, was that the meeting that I went to was the fourth in a series of five. So the first meeting regarding this was back in December, and that was the annexation hearing. Uh, that hearing was the first reading and to decide whether or not they would annex this property. It's dubbed the Barnhizzle property because it belongs to Brent and Candy Barnhizzle. Um, so at the first reading, there was no objections to annexing this property, but Commissioner Basore, she did bring up the fact that all of these properties in this neighborhood are on septic, and she would like them on sewer because it's really close to Tampa Bay, and this could cause pollution and contamination problems in the near future. Uh, to which the city manager, Mr. Matthew Spohr, he responded. He said on or around 2010, they had conducted a study, and the cost was enormous for tying these properties into the city sewer grid. So they, at that point, approached former Senator Bill Nelson to see if they could get some federal grant money to help tie these properties into the sewer system. Unfortunately, that failed, but they remain hopeful of possibly doing that in the future. Um, the annexation meeting went with little little other discussion. Everybody approved it without any contention or disagreement. Um, Same went for the second hearing on annexing the property. Planning and Zoning Board, again, the issue of tying it into the sewers was brought up by the Planning and Zoning Board, and they talked about approaching that subject again in the future. Um, so, which brought me to the hearing that I went to, which was the rezoning of the property. The rezoning of the property would be to an R2 zoning from an R3, which is really unsubstantial. it's pretty much the difference between what Pinellas County calls this property zoning and safety harbor. It's almost identical. It just has to do with lot size and the buildings on the property. Now, one thing I did find significant was that upon investigating the Florida statutes regarding the annexation of properties, I found that under Florida statute chapter 171, specifically 171.0413, states that any municipality may annex contiguous, compact, unincorporated territory. And then under Florida statute 171.031, contiguous is defined as meaning that a substantial part of a boundary of the territory sought to be annexed by a municipality is coterminous with a part of the boundary of the municipality. And compactness is defined to mean concentration of a piece of property in a single area and precludes any action which would create enclaves, pockets, or finger areas in serpentine patterns. So really what this means is that they want to keep the property square. They don't want any big gaps in the property. There's a few exceptions to this, which include if a road were to split up the properties, or a railroad, or a waterway, or something of that nature, that would be acceptable. However, on the first reading of the annexation, Director Stenmark, she is Marcy Stenmark, Director Marcy Stenmark, she's the Community Development Director. She presented this graphic. So this red area here in the rectangle is the property to be annexed. The yellow properties here are the ones that Safety Harbor has already annexed, and the gray areas are unincorporated Pinellas County. Now, as you can see, this clearly is not what the Florida statutes read as. We can see there's pockets and enclaves, and it's kind of broken up. It's definitely not compact and contiguous. There is no significant border that is coming into contact with the city of Safety Harbor. Yet all of these other properties are still utilizing the services of Safety Harbor, albeit they're paying for it, but they're still tied into the infrastructure and the services of Safety Harbor. So the stakeholders at the meeting, there was Mayor Joe Ayub, and really it's an election year, so for him, I would assume he's concerned with winning the upcoming election. He's focused on avoiding contention and creating the satisfaction amongst his constituency. So pretty much he wants to make these people happy, bring them into the city, and get them on his side. Doesn't really want to rock the boat, so to speak. There's Vice Mayor Cliff Mertz. Vice Mayor Mertz was also focused on the constituency satisfaction. By supporting them now, likely he can win their votes in the future. Nobody objected to the annexation or rezoning. There was Commissioner Nancy Basore. She's also seeking to satisfy the constituency, but she was the one who brought up the issue about being tied into the sewer and the potential for problems with the septic systems on those properties. Commissioner Carlos Diaz, he was very reserved, very quiet. He expressed no opinion whatsoever. He supported everything that happened. There was Commissioner Commissioner Andy Zudrow. Now, this was interesting because the meeting that I attended started off very contentious with somebody levying unsubstantiated and very lofty accusations at the mayor. And this person was trying to draw Commissioner Zudrow into this, asking him to more or less take his side on it. So it seems that this individual may have been friendly with him, and it brings me to believe that maybe Zudrow is opposed to Mayor Ayub, but he supported the annexation and the rezoning anyway without any contention. There was a city manager, Matt Spoor. He's clearly just concerned with the efficient operation of the city and keeping the council happy. He also was concerned with getting these properties tied into the sewer system. This is something that he knew a lot about, and he had obviously researched in the past. City Attorney Nikki Day, she was involved. Attorney Day, she was just concerned with following the legal standards required of the quasi-judicial hearing, and she offered a steady stream of guidance and instruction throughout the process. Um, then there was a community development director, Marcy Stenmark. She was concerned with uncovering all the necessary information associated with the annexation and rezoning process, which is dubbed by the city officials as an ANZO process, as if it were one entity. And it's really why we're discussing this together, the annexation and rezoning, because they're so intricately linked. You cannot adequately discuss one without talking about the other. So she was really just focused on getting the information out about the ANZO process, presenting it in a comprehensive manner. The only real presentation she did was at the first hearing of the annexation, and then all the subsequent annexation and rezoning hearings referred back to her initial presentation at the first meeting. There was the community planner, GIS, which stands for Graphic Information System Analyst, Brandon Henry. Now he was there to support Director Stenmark in all of her duties, and also he, at the request of the city manager, gave me a very comprehensive interview. He was more than happy to answer all of my questions. There was Candy and Brent Barnhizzle, the owners of the property. In their application, they expressly stated that they wanted to be annexed in order to become participating citizens in the city of Safety Harbor. So they wanted to participate in the elections and all of the things that the city has to offer. The Barnhizzles, neighbors or stakeholders, many have already been annexed and rezoned, and most of them, I imagine, would support this because it's easier to maintain standards to keep the neighborhood looking nice, which of course lends well to property values. The citizens of Safety Harbor, presumably, they would be in favor of this action because it increases the footprint of the city and expands the tax base, which is a benefit to all of them. The City of Safety Harbor Planning and Zoning Board, they were just concerned with maintaining zoning standards while the annexed properties. And then the Pinellas County government, and I can only assume that they would be in favor of this annexation because Safety Harbor would take over all responsibilities of any duties that they were handling in that area. On Thursday, March 5th, at 3 p.m., I interviewed Mr. Henry, and I had some tough questions, according to him, for him. So the questions I had for him sort of as follows. I asked him, since there are studies and research to be done with the rezoning, who pays for this? And he said the zoning is attached to the annexation. There is a small annexation fee, but the city pays for the rezoning. and for the studies and everything. If somebody wants a higher zoning, then they have to pay an $1,100 application fee. But for most people, they're um, satisfied with the standard zoning. So that's a cost that the city has to absorb. And how does the city determine what the zoning of an annex property should be? The answer to that was that it's whatever's closest to Pinellas County's zoning designation of that area. Um, and pretty much that is because there's already buildings and so forth on the property, so it's hard to change the zoning without having to grandfather something in. Since the rezoning of the Barnhizzle property was just a segment of the ANZO process, um, I asked what if they didn't agree with the rezoning process, and again we got back to that they would have to pay an application fee to apply for a higher zoning. I wanted to know if different zones collected different tax rates, and the answer to that was no. He said the tax rate is pretty much the same. Um, uh, since the rezoning is done as a function of annexation, though, how does the city decide who, what, and when to annex? And this to me was important because this really gets to the heart of the process, why we're doing it, why they're annexing. And Mr. Henry said that the city does not aggressively seek to annex property. It's really only done on an application basis. So I asked him what the greatest benefits of annexation besides expanding the tax base, and he told me really mostly just the expansion of the tax base. He said there's no real benefit. I might disagree with that personally, but and then I asked properties that are annexed but tied into the city services pay a fee for those services, sometimes above what citizens pay. What does that additional payment cover? And Mr. Henry told me that some costs are covered by property taxes that non-annexed properties aren't paying, so they have to pay for that, and that's why they pay a little bit more for their services. Um, uh, and I asked, does that just cover just the costs associated with the services? And he said mostly, which led me to question what happens when unforeseen events occur, like if a water line breaks or something. Who absorbs that cost? And he said the city covers that. So when you say the city covers that, that means the taxpayers cover that. And essentially, those people that are receiving the city services, they're paying for them, but they're not paying for these emergencies. That is left with the city taxpayers. Um, so I asked if there would be a benefit to annexing and rezoning properties as a routine practice without waiting for people to apply, and he said maybe there would be to make the process more efficient, but they really just want to consider the will of the people. Um, but I asked him how would it make it more efficient, and that's when he told me that there was a property a couple streets over from the Barnhizzles, and they had applied for re-annexation. For annexation and rezoning as well. But in election years, there's a cutoff. And that's really just because so the supervisor of elections can do their job. Because it's hard to keep track of people and all of that during an election year. So these people missed their cutoff. So while the Barnhizzles got in and they got annexed and rezoned, these other people are going to be put off for months before their annexation is going to be voted on and rezoned. So last I said I brought up the Florida statutes, and I said Florida says that when annexing property, it should be contiguous, coterminous, and compact. How does that come into consideration when annexing properties? That's when Mr. Henry told me I was asking tough questions. He said he would have to look into that. So it seems to me that Safety Harbor's process of annexation and rezoning is rooted solely in the will of the citizens. So while keeping the citizens in mind is of the highest importance, um, it's not the only consideration. At some point, the opportunity cost will become too high. So there will come a day when that one more property will force you to hire more employees or to purchase another vehicle or something of that nature because you can no longer serve all of your citizens. So the cost of bringing that one more property in is much greater than the money that that property produces for you. So um, that paired with the fact that it's hard to maintain state regulations for shape and continuity of the land that's annexed leads me to recommend that perhaps quarterly or periodically uh, the city should look at all of the properties that are potentially to be annexed and decide in blocks whether to annex or rezone them or not. This will save on costs for research. This will this will eliminate the appearance of impropriety. It won't seem like somebody's getting fast tracked where somebody else can't make it into an election because their property isn't getting annexed. And it will also give the city more bargaining power if they have more citizens to represent when they go to the federal government asking for a grant to tie these properties into the sewer system. So this is my case study. Please post any questions. I'll try to respond to them. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this.